Exploring the Analects, Episode 14, Passages 7.12 and 9.13. Golden Handcuffs and Pearls Before Swine. Hey folks, this is Elliot Bernstein. Thanks for joining me for Episode 14 of Exploring the Analects. In this episode, we'll be covering passages 7.12 and 9.13 of the Analects, two passages I've chosen especially for my most dedicated listener, my dear old dad. Both of these passages give a little glimpse into the economics and business world of Confucius's day. I'll first read the passages in Chinese and English, then discuss the historical and cultural context behind them to provide a deeper understanding. After that, we'll analyze the language found in the passages as a way to learn new words and phrases in classical Chinese and modern Mandarin. Be sure to follow along with the episode guide on analects.net, where you'll also find all the Chinese characters for the passages and key terms in this episode. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at elliot@analects.net. All right then, let's get started. I've combined a couple of well-known phrases to kick off our discussion of these passages. I think they'll fit in well, so keep them in mind and refer back to them if you get lost. I think they'll help out quite a bit. Never put yourself in golden handcuffs. Never cast pearls before swine. Now I'm going to read the two passages in a modern Mandarin pronunciation, followed by the translations into English. 7.12 子曰富而可求也虽知边之事无以为之如不可求从无所好 The master said, if it were appropriate to seek wealth, even if it meant working as a guard holding a whip, I'd still do so. Since it's not, instead I'll pursue my own passions. 9.13 Zigong 曰有美玉于斯运足而藏诸求善古而孤诸子曰孤之哉孤之哉我待孤者也 Zigong said, here's a beautiful piece of jade. What do you do with it? Lock it up and hide it? Or try to sell it at a good price? The master responded, oh, I'd sell it. I'd sell it for sure. I'm just waiting for the right buyer. These two business-focused passages give a glimpse into when Confucius believed it was and was not appropriate to put one's talents to use for profit. On the whole, he was a proponent of waiting for the right opportunity to come along. There's also a hidden caveat within. If you sell yourself short, or you agree to work purely for profit, you may end up in all sorts of unenviable positions. All right, now let's dive in a bit deeper and discuss some of the ideas behind the passages, along with some philosophical, historical, and cultural context you should have in order to really grasp their meaning. In the previous episode, we contrasted Confucianism with Taoism. In this episode, we'll kick things off by taking a look at another branch of Chinese philosophy called Mohism. In some ways, Mohism might seem more familiar to us today than practically any other ancient Chinese school of thought. Its core tenets were universal love, utilitarianism, and frugality, as well as a rejection of aggressive violence. The founder of this philosophy, who went by the name Mozi, was born just after Confucius's death and the start of the Warring States period. You wouldn't need to be a genius to guess that the Warring States was even more violent than the Spring and Autumn period, and Mozi's philosophy was a reaction to not only that violence, but also to the perceived failure of other lines of thought to bring peace and harmony to the world. In fact, it's believed he was a student of the Confucian Rujia school before rejecting these ways and forming his own school. Just as a reminder, Rujia, Ruism, or the Ruist school, was the class of ritual specialists that Confucius was part of. Their occupation and practices were much older than Confucius himself. And though he transformed and consolidated those teachings, Ruism continued on this path past his death. And Ru is still the name that Confucianism is known by in Chinese up to today. I'll mainly refer to this group as Ruists throughout this episode, since we're focused on their practices and societal functions, rather than the specifics of the analects in Confucius's philosophy. Mozi disagreed with many things about Ruist values. Their insistence that it's natural for one to care about one's family more than other people. Their emphasis on rituals, music, and ancient books. Their engagement with the aristocracy and political elites. But the reason I'm bringing up Mohism today isn't really to teach you all about the ways they disagreed with Confucians. It's to start off by giving you a particularly memorable perspective on the economic and occupational engagements of Ruists at the time in history that we're talking about, and to kick off our deep dive into passages 7.12 and 9.13. I'm going to quote the central Mohist text, authored by Mozi himself and called, you guessed it, the Mozi. You gotta give him credit. At least they kept things consistent. Anyway, here it is from the chapter entitled Against Ru. The Ruist avoids work and is indolent and proud, self-indulgent in drinking and eating, and too lazy to work. He often suffers from hunger and cold and is in danger of freezing and starvation, without ability to avert them. He behaves like a beggar, grasps food like a hamster, gazes at things like a he-goat, and rises up like a wild boar. The gentlemen all laugh at him. He becomes angry and exclaims, "What does the undisciplined man know about the good Ruist?" In spring and summer, he begs for grain. When the 5 grains are all gathered in, he resorts to funerals. All the sons and grandsons are taken along and are filled with drink and food. It's sufficient for him to manage but a few funerals. He depends on others' houses for his wealth and uses others' fields to uphold his dignity. When a death takes place in a rich family, he will rejoice greatly, for it is his opportunity for clothing and food. If you enjoyed that, I highly recommend reading this whole chapter. It's basically one long diss track about Confucius, his disciples, and how they thought about the world. So there you have one perspective on how the Ruists fit into the economy of their day. Judgments aside, there are some objective facts to be gleaned from it. Ruists did actually profit from funerals, since conducting the ceremonies and advising on the proper handling of related issues was among their specialties. This is something like you'd expect a priest to officiate a wedding or funeral, except that in the case of the Ruists, their role was greatly expanded. It was almost like a wedding planner, legal consultant, DJ, and officiant, all bundled up into one. It's probably a bit of a generalization to say that they were all lazy, proud, and self-indulgent, or that they all begged and suffered hunger and cold. But there's a point buried in here that I hope is going to lead us to what passages 7.12 and 9.13 are really all about. Confucius praised his most dedicated student, Yan Hui, in passage 6:11 for his austere lifestyle. Yan Hui lived in a narrow alley with only simple food and drink, and he still took great joy in life. But this all seems a little odd. On the one hand, we hear Mozi and even Confucius himself saying, Ruists are happy living in poor conditions and depending on others to get by. On the other hand, Confucius is offering to hold the whip if wealth were worth pursuing, and looking for a great price for some hypothetical piece of jade. So which is it? Get rich, or sleep in an alley and beg? The point of 7.12 and 9.13 is that it can actually be either one. At any given time, whether Confucius would advocate living in poverty or trying to get rich completely depends on the state of the world and the people involved. First, in 7.12, Confucius tells us, at the time he is making the statement, wealth is not worth pursuing. Because that's not the case, he prefers to do something he loves. In his case, that would probably be teaching, seeking to improve government, and engaging in self-cultivation through the arts, literature, and personal engagements. But you'll notice, the fact that wealth is not worth pursuing at that time leaves open the possibility that wealth can be worth pursuing under certain circumstances. The circumstance making it not worth pursuing during his lifetime was the quality of the aristocracy and royalty around him. As we've covered before, many of these families were either feuding among themselves, feuding with one another, plotting against hereditary leaders, or plotting against the leaders of other states. This was often to the detriment of the common people, if not directly with the destruction of crops, infrastructure, and communities, then indirectly by setting negative examples and acting with negligence despite their position of authority. Confucius knew what serving people he did not personally respect would mean for him. He would be in the unenviable position of having to do their bidding. Imagine you got a job offer with a very lucrative salary, but the boss had a reputation for being strange and cruel. You decide to ignore the warning signs and accept the job. You're getting paid and you can finally afford a new car and a new house, so you're paying your mortgage and it's going all right. Then one day, your boss tells you that you've got a new job responsibility. Every day, you're required to go kick a puppy. You tell him that's a terrible idea and you want a different assignment. But then he threatens you. Not only will you be fired if you don't agree, you and your family will be exiled, or worse. Well, now you're between a rock and a hard place. That's the kind of position Confucius didn't want to get into. Seems pretty sensible that he'd want to stay home and teach his students. Now on the flip side, he says, say you read a job description and it says, hiring guards, responsibilities, holding a whip at the entrance to the market, chasing people who try to steal stuff, detaining them and possibly whipping them if they get really rowdy. Doesn't sound like a very good time, does it? But the pay is not bad, and this isn't some shady market. It's full of honest people getting the things they need. You learn about the boss and the boss's boss and the boss's boss's boss, and these are people with good reputations. It's not like you're going to work as a guard for Darth Vader or something. Sure, it sucks that you might end up having to whip someone, but you feel confident nobody's going to tell you to whip a bunch of nuns or something. According to 7.12, go ahead. Make that money. Now on to 9.13. You'll probably remember Zigong is best known as Confucius's businessman disciple. So it's no surprise that he's put a bit of a trade-focused dilemma in front of Confucius. This beautiful piece of jade, what do you do with it? Keep it for yourself, locked away where only you can enjoy it? Or find someone to buy it, at a good price of course, and let the world appreciate its excellence? Confucius does not need to think deeply about his answer. He's already completely clear about what he'd do. The same logic applies here as it does to being the one who's holding the whip. He's not only willing to sell that jade, he's actually eager to do so. But not just for any price, not even for a good price. He's waiting for the price, the one he knows it's worth. That piece of jade, it has great value to him, and he's willing to sell it, but only to the right buyer, the one who also sees its great value. Of course, nobody really believes we're talking about a piece of jade here. It's well understood that Confucius is thinking of himself like that fine piece of jade. Having wandered from state to state, year after year, why has he not settled down and found one ruler he could provide with his wise counsel? Well, it's simple. None of those rulers have seen the value in him that he sees in himself. Whether it was the ruler of Wei, asking him for advice on military matters, or seeing the rulers of Lu ignore their duties day after day, it was obvious to him that these rulers did not share his values, and so they could not value him properly either. The advice in 7.12 and 9.13 can be easily generalized. First, know who you're working for and who you're doing business with. If you don't respect them, if you have any suspicion that they might ask you to do something you're uncomfortable with, then it's not worth putting yourself in the position of depending on them for your livelihood. Second, be clear about your own value and your own values. If you're confident you can make a big impact, but you're already occupied with something small because you took the first thing that came along, then you're selling yourself short. In both cases, Confucius says, it's better to hold out. Spend your time and energy doing what you love. Maybe that's admiring beautiful pieces of jade, or finding an easy job that doesn't take much out of you, so you can work in your garden over the weekend. Whatever it is, it's better than the mess you could get into otherwise. Now that we've worked through the meaning of these two passages, let's check out the language. I'll start off with a set of words you should focus on if you're in the early stages of studying Chinese. Then we'll talk about the more idiosyncratic and classical Chinese-focused elements. From 7.12, I suggest you check out the following. Fu, wealthy. This is used alone, especially during the Chinese New Year, and in compound words like fuyo. soy, although, even though. The same character is used in the modern compound 虽然, although. 如 here means since. In modern Chinese, it often means like, when used alone, and if, in the compound 如果. 从 to follow. In modern Mandarin, used alone, it often means from, as in the phrase 你从哪里来? Where are you from? 所 that which. This sense is still reflected in modern Mandarin in the phrase 我所知道, as far as I know. How? To love, to be fond of something. This is the most common meaning in classical Chinese, not good as in modern Mandarin. Here's beginner vocab for 9.13. Yu, jade. You may have already learned yumi, corn. Jade grain is so much better of a name than corn. Are, and. This is reflected in the modern Mandarin compound 而且. Cang, to hide. In modern Mandarin, it's still used with this meaning. 求善价, to seek a good price. These characters all still make sense, though shan now is used more generally to refer to a kind or compassionate person. And finally, dai, to wait, as in the compound dong dai. Now for some of the more classical Chinese-focused vocabulary and grammar, starting with 7.12. 富而可求也. This phrase has a kind of topic comment structure that can throw you off if you're trying to render are as and ke as can. Think of are as if it were and ke as suitable. So the topic is wealth and the comment is if it were suitable to seek. 编织士. Shi is a soldier of sorts. In this case, it's one who handles a whip. Here's a nerdy history note. In ancient China, a whip could be either rigid or flexible. Those rigid whips we'd probably call batons or maces. 无意为之 just means I'd still do it. Wu is the most common first-person pronoun in the analects, although in our second phrase today, we still see 我, the modern first-person pronoun. Finally, 从无所好, we see 无here again, in this phrase literally translating to follow what I love. On to 9.13. 于是, here is, or here lies. These characters hint at this being a hypothetical scenario. 猪 appears twice. This character is a combination of 之, it, and hu, a question marker. They confirm that this is a hypothetical. 在 is an emphatic particle. In this case, we could render it as absolutely, or even just use an exclamation point. And finally, 顾者 literally means the buyer. But of course, if Confucius has to wait for a buyer, then he must be waiting for the right buyer. All right, folks. Thanks for sticking with me. Again, I'm your host, Elliot Bernstein. If you've enjoyed this episode of Exploring the Analects, you'll definitely want to listen to the next one. We'll be discussing passages 4.12 and 4.16 and having our first encounter with the concept of li, or profit. Confucius was okay with making money, but he also felt there were times that this could be taken too far. Don't forget to visit analects.net to check out the episode guide, and drop me a line at elliot@analects.net if you've got any questions or comments. See you next time.